March 28, 1944. Ruhr Valley, Germany. The sirens have already stopped screaming. Smoke hangs low over the rail yards outside Essen, thick enough to taste. It burns the back of the throat. Somewhere in the darkness, a fire still crackles inside a collapsed warehouse, the flames starved and orange, like a dying animal refusing to go quiet. Oberingenieur Karl-Heinz Müller stands ankle-deep in broken brick and glass, helmet pushed back on his head, clipboard dangling uselessly from one hand. His ears are still ringing. They all are. The bombing ended less than an hour ago. Or so he thought. A distant sound crawls into the night. Not explosions. Engines. Low at first. Almost imagined. Müller freezes. So do the men around him. Railway engineers, electricians, forced labor crews, Luftschutz volunteers. Everyone pauses mid-movement as if the ruins themselves have inhaled. The sound grows. Deep, rhythmic, unmistakable. Someone whispers it before Müller can stop himself from thinking it. Flugzeug. Aircraft. He tilts his head back. The clouds are still glowing faintly from fires below, the sky smeared with smoke and moonlight. And then he sees them, dark shapes sliding through the haze, not diving, not attacking, but passing overhead. Again, not returning to bomb. Returning from bombing somewhere else. The realization lands like a physical blow. They're still flying. All around him, men stare upward, stunned, exhausted, hollow-eyed. The raid they just survived wasn't the night's main event. It was only one wave in a system that doesn't sleep. Müller lowers his gaze to the wreckage around him. Twisted rails. A smashed signal box. Craters where locomotives stood hours earlier. His job, their job, is to make this place work again before morning. By dawn, trains must move. Steel must roll. Ammunition must ship. Because if it doesn't, someone in Berlin will ask why. And someone else will decide who pays. Less than 12 hours earlier, Müller had been confident. The Reich had lost bombers, lost cities, lost men, but it had engineers, men who could rebuild faster than the enemy could destroy. That was the belief. The British came by night, the Americans by day, predictable, alternating, brutal but manageable. Or so the planners said. This night was supposed to prove it. RAF Pathfinders had arrived first, dropping flares that burned like artificial moons. Then, the main force, hundreds of Lancasters, unloading their bomb loads in disciplined streams. High explosives, incendiaries, deliberate patterns designed not just to destroy, but to overwhelm repair capacity. Still, the Germans adapted. Fire brigades moved before the last bombs fell. Repair crews waited in hardened shelters, tools pre-staged, timetables already drafted. Müller himself had walked the site at dusk, marking priority lines in red pencil. We'll have partial rail service by noon, he'd said. He believed it. Then the bombs came. And then they didn't stop. Even now, hours later, the ground is warm beneath his boots. A young signal technician nearby drops to one knee, retching into the rubble. No one reacts. Everyone is beyond sympathy, beyond fear. Fear requires energy. Müller looks at his watch. 1:24. In theory, the sky should be empty now. Instead, the engine noise continues, not one formation, but many. Some high, some lower, different rhythms, different directions. American. British. Returning. Departing. A flow. Like traffic. And in that moment, standing in the ruins, Müller feels something he hasn't felt since the war began. Not panic. Not anger. Something colder. The sense that this isn't a battle anymore. It's a process. By 02, repair work begins anyway. Floodlights click on, powered by emergency generators. Shadows jump across broken walls. Men move with mechanical obedience, lifting rails, clearing debris, reconnecting cables with hands that shake from fatigue and adrenaline. But the sky never fully quiets. Every few minutes, engines pass overhead, sometimes unseen, sometimes visible, black crosses silhouetted against cloud gaps, heading west, heading home. Someone mutters, "How many do they have?" No one answers, because the question itself is dangerous. If you start counting aircraft, you eventually start counting factories. And that's a number you can't fight with shovels and steel. Miller notices something worse. The repair crews are slowing. Not physically, mentally. They keep looking up, waiting, flinching at sounds that aren't explosions. The certainty is gone. The idea that once the raid ends, the danger ends with it. Because tonight proves something new. The Allies don't need surprise anymore. They don't need rest. They don't even need clear skies. They just keep coming. Wave after wave. Night after night. And standing there, clipboard forgotten, Mueller finally understands what no intelligence report has yet put into words. They aren't fighting bombers. They're fighting an industrial machine, one that replaces losses faster than Germany can clear rubble. One that treats destruction as routine. One that never truly leaves the sky. As dawn approaches, Mueller looks east, where the horizon is beginning to pale behind smoke and flame. And for the first time, a question settles in his mind that refuses to leave. How do you repair a nation? Faster than it can be erased. Dawn arrives without ceremony. There is no sunrise, only a gradual thinning of smoke, a weak gray light bleeding into the ruins of the Ruhr. Fires still burn in pockets, stubborn and quiet. The air smells of coal dust, oil, and wet ash. Karl-Heinz Miller hasn't slept. None of them have. By 5:30, the first reconnaissance aircraft pass overhead, high, fast, unchallenged. Their engines are sharper than the bombers, cleaner, almost casual. They circle once, twice, photographing the damage with clinical precision. The engineers know what that means. Tonight wasn't just destruction. It was measurement. By mid-morning, reports begin arriving from other sites. Duisburg, Bochum, Dortmund. Same story. Different ruins. Rail yards hit again, marshalling yards flattened, power substations shattered just as crews restored temporary lines. Synthetic fuel plants damaged, not destroyed, but interrupted. Always interrupted. Never allowed to stabilize. Miller stands in a commandeered office, one wall missing, roof sagging, as an officer from the Reich Ministry of Armaments reads the situation aloud. His voice is flat, drained of persuasion. Repair estimates revised upward, delays now measured in days, not hours. That sentence would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. Days meant missed shipments. Missed shipments meant idle factories. Idle factories meant Berlin asking questions. And Berlin never asked twice. By noon, Mueller is on a train heading east. Not a passenger train, a slow-moving flatbed convoy carrying replacement rails, signal equipment, and exhausted men slumped against crates. The tracks ahead are provisional, barely aligned, good enough to move material but not speed. As the train crawls forward, Miller watches the countryside roll past. Cratered fields, blackened farmhouses, bridges reinforced with timber braces and prayers. Every few kilometers, evidence of last night's work. Fresh bomb holes still steaming. Emergency repairs already underway. It's the same everywhere. Fix. Run. Break again. He pulls a folded document from his coat. A production chart. He studied it a dozen times already. American aircraft production for February, over 8,000 planes. British production, thousands more. Losses. Heavy. Replacement. Immediate. The numbers don't feel real. They feel abstract. Until you hear the engines. Until you realize those numbers sound like this. At a repair depot near Kassel, Miller meets Major Ernst Vogel, a Luftwaffe logistics officer with bloodshot eyes and a cigarette perpetually burning down between his fingers. They're not trying to knock us out, Vogel says quietly, watching mechanics patch flak damage on a rail-mounted crane. They're trying to keep us standing, but bleeding. Miller says nothing. They know we can rebuild, Vogel continues. So they make rebuilding the battlefield. The phrase sticks. The battlefield isn't the sky anymore. It's steel timetables, power grids, rail switches, night shifts. Vogel flicks ash into the dirt. Do you know how many locomotives we've lost this month? Miller shakes his head. Enough that Berlin stopped counting publicly. That's when Miller finally understands what's changed. Early in the war, bombing was a duel. Bombers versus fighters, guns versus armor, skill against skill. Now it's capacity versus capacity. The Allies don't care if tonight's raid is costly because tomorrow's raid is already built, already fueled, already crewed. Factories in Detroit and Manchester don't pause to mourn. They produce. And produce. And produce. That night, the bombers return again. Different target. Same rhythm. This time, Muller watches from a reinforced shelter as the first explosions ripple across the horizon, not where he stands, but close enough to feel. The pattern is familiar now. Pathfinders, markers, main force. He watches men flinch automatically at every distant concussion, muscles twitching before thought catches up. Fatigue is becoming the most dangerous enemy. A man misaligns a rail by centimeters. A signal is miswired. A train derails days later, far from any bomb crater. And somewhere, a report will blame sabotage or incompetence. Never exhaustion. Never inevitability. Near midnight, Miller steps outside the shelter between waves. The sky is busy, traffic lanes layered at different altitudes, bombers inbound and outbound, fighters escorting, night fighters probing. It's orderly, industrial. The sky doesn't look like chaos. It looks like a factory floor. That thought unsettles him more than any explosion. A young engineer stands beside him, barely 20, face pale under grime. Herr Oberingenieur, he asks, voice hesitant. How long can they keep this up? Miller looks at the sky, at the endless movement, at the realization forming, slow, heavy, undeniable. They don't have to stop, he says finally. The words feel treasonous, even whispered. Because the truth is simpler than propaganda. Germany is repairing damage faster than any nation in history. But the Allies are creating damage faster than history can respond. And this war, at least from Miller's vantage point, has quietly crossed a line. Victory will not come from bravery, or sacrifice, or endurance. It will come from whichever side can turn human lives, metal, and fuel into motion without pause. The bombers fade westward again. And Muller realizes something worse is coming. Not a bigger raid. Not a deadlier bomb. But a future where the bombers don't need to destroy cities at all. Only to visit them repeatedly. To deny rest. To deny recovery. To deny hope. He tightens his coat against the cold night air. Somewhere deep down, a question forms, darker than fear. What happens when repair is no longer enough? The third night comes before the second is finished. That is how it feels to the men on the ground, as if time itself has collapsed into a single, endless shift lit by fire and flares. By early April 1944, the Ruhr no longer measures days by calendar dates, it measures them by raids. Miller keeps his own count and pencil on the inside cover of his notebook. Night raid. Day raid. Night raid. The page fills quickly. On April 4th, the Americans arrive before noon. High-altitude formations of B-17 flying fortresses, contrails stitching the sky into white scars. The flak batteries open up automatically now, crews moving without conversation, without expectation. The bombers hold course. They always do. Below, repair crews scatter, not to shelters, but to the edges of sites they finished repairing only hours earlier. Rails laid at dawn are ripped apart by noon. Power lines reconnected by midnight are severed by lunchtime. Miller watches a newly installed switch assembly vanish under a blossom of dust and fire. The blast throws him to the ground. His helmet rolls away. When he stands, ears screaming, the switch no longer exists. Neither does the effort behind it. Something breaks then, not in the infrastructure, but in the men. No one says it aloud, but the understanding spreads quietly, like a fever. They are chasing something that no longer stands still. The Reich responds the only way it knows how. More men. Longer hours. Harsher discipline. Orders come down demanding repair times measured in minutes. Sabotage is blamed for failures that are plainly mechanical. Exhaustion is treated as moral weakness. Miller signs paperwork condemning a Ukrainian forced laborer for deliberate negligence after a rail joint fails under load. The man is gone the next day. The rail still breaks. By mid-April, engineers begin making choices they were never trained to make. Which line matters more? Coal or steel? Troop movements or civilian transport? Every decision saves something and sacrifices something else. And every sacrifice feeds the same machine-grinding overhead. At a briefing in Düsseldorf, a Luftwaffe colonel delivers what is meant to be reassurance. Allied losses remain unsustainable, he says, pointing at charts. Their bomber crews cannot endure this indefinitely. Miller studies the graph. Losses per mission are plotted carefully. What isn't plotted is replacement speed. Factories replace aircraft faster than charts can update. Crews are trained in parallel. When one unit bleeds, another fills the gap. The colonel doesn't mention this. Muller doesn't ask. Some truths have become impolite. That night, the bombers come again. But this time, something is different. They don't hit the main yards. They hit the backups. Secondary switching stations. Emergency power nodes. The provisional repairs, the improvisations Miller's teams relied on to keep things moving. The message is unmistakable. We see you. We know how you adapt. And we will adapt faster. Miller stands under a concrete overhang as delayed explosions march outward from the city center, each one erasing another contingency plan. It isn't destruction anymore. It's anticipation. Around Thurid, Muller finds himself sitting on a crate, staring at his hands. They are shaking. Not from fear, from the realization that his skill, the thing he has trained for his entire life, is being outpaced. Engineering assumes stability, at least temporary stability. A repaired bridge must last long enough to matter. A repaired rail must carry traffic. Now, repairs exist only to be targeted. A rail line that functions for 6 hours is considered a success. That is no longer engineering. It is triage. At dawn, word spreads quietly among the crews. Another region has been hit. Again, the bombers are leapfrogging targets, never allowing the same area to fully recover, never allowing the same men to rest. Miller flips to a fresh page in his notebook. He writes one word: unhaltbar, unsustainable. And for the first time, the word applies not to the enemy, but to themselves. By late April, something else begins to happen. Repair crews stop asking when the next raid will come. They ask where, and even that feels academic, because the answer is always the same. Everywhere that still works. Miller watches a train roll out of a yard patched together by sheer willpower. It moves slowly, carefully. He knows it will be bombed within days. Maybe hours. The bombers are no longer trying to win by destruction. They are winning by denial. Denying recovery. Denying rhythm. Denying the future. That night, as engines pass overhead once more, Miller doesn't look up. He already knows what he'll see. And somewhere beyond the clouds, the industrial machine continues, indifferent, relentless, and now fully aware that it has crossed the threshold where repair no longer changes the outcome. The question is no longer if the system will fail. Only when, and how many nights it will take. By May 1944, the air war has a tempo. Not frantic. Not desperate. Efficient. Miller senses it before he can explain it. The way raids now arrive on schedule, how damage seems calculated rather than chaotic. Targets aren't chosen for symbolism anymore. They're chosen for effect. At 10, on May 12th, the Americans strike oil. Synthetic fuel plants across Germany erupt almost simultaneously. Luna, Bolin, Bru. Pillars of smoke climb so high they cast shadows across entire regions. For Muller and his fellow engineers, this is the moment everything tightens. No fuel means no trains. No trains means no repairs. No repairs mean bomb damage begins to accumulate, not reset. Within days, rail movements slow everywhere. Diesel locomotives sit idle. Coal deliveries stall. Emergency generators run dry. Muller watches a repair convoy fail to leave a depot because there is nothing left to burn. The enemy has stopped fighting infrastructure. They are fighting interdependence. The realization spreads faster than any memo. You can rebuild rails if you have fuel. You can repair power if you have parts. You can move parts if the rails work. Each system leans on another. The Allied bombers don't need to destroy everything. Only enough to break the chain. At a late-night meeting in a bunker outside Cologne, an exhausted official finally says what everyone knows. "We can repair anything," he mutters. But not everything at once. Silence follows. Because that is exactly what the enemy demands. The raids continue. Sometimes twice a day now. Miller marks the map with red pins until the board looks infected. There is no longer a front line. There is no rear. The sky belongs to the Allies. German fighters rise when they can. Flak fires when ammunition allows. Losses are inflicted, but the machine absorbs them. Every loss triggers a replacement already waiting. It is not courage that fills the sky. It is capacity. One evening, Miller stands beside a stalled locomotive, its boiler cold, paint blistered from nearby explosions. A crew waits nearby, silent, unsure what to do. They are no longer waiting for orders. They are waiting for fuel. Above them, bombers pass, not attacking this time, merely transiting. The contrast is unbearable. Motion in the sky. Stagnation on the ground. Miller closes his eyes. For years, Germany believed war could be won by superior skill. Better engineers. Better planners. Better discipline. But skill cannot overcome a deficit of scale. You cannot outwork a factory that never sleeps. Late in May, Müller receives a message from Berlin. Repair priorities are being revised. Some regions will no longer be fully restored after raids. Temporary suspension of effort, the document calls it. Müller reads the line twice. Suspension of effort. It means abandonment. The moment the state quietly admits it cannot keep up. He folds the paper carefully and puts it away. No one around him needs to see it. They already feel it. That night, the bombers come again. But Miller notices something new. The flak is thinner. The searchlight slower. Not because of fear, because of shortage. The air defense network is beginning to starve of fuel, of power, of coordination. The system is unraveling in slow motion. Above, the Allied formations hold steady, immaculate, almost serene. They are not rushing. Time is on their side now. As dawn breaks, Miller walks through a yard that will not be repaired. Rails bent like wire. Signals smashed beyond improvisation. A sign hangs crookedly from a post. Destination letters half burned away. This place once mattered. Now it is a statistic. He realizes then that the war has shifted again. Not with a battle, not with a surrender, but with an arithmetic truth no speech can undo. The Allies are no longer testing Germany's resilience. They have measured it and found it finite. As engines fade into the west, Müller understands something he will never report. The bombers don't need to come forever, only long enough. Because once the numbers favor inevitability, the outcome stops being a question. By June 1944, the bombers no longer announce themselves. No sirens. No warning. There is rarely time. Müller notices it first in the way people move, heads tilted upward at every distant hum, conversations trailing off mid-sentence, hands freezing on tools. The sky has become a presence. Not hostile. Not dramatic. Constant. On June 6th, word of the landings in Normandy reaches the Ruhr by afternoon. It spreads quietly, carried by looks more than voices. The engineers don't cheer. They don't panic. They simply work faster. Because they know what follows. And it does. That night, the bombers arrive not in waves, but in overlap. British formations crossing paths with American returns. Fighters threading through bomber streams. Reconnaissance aircraft already photographing tomorrow's targets, while tonight's bombs are still falling. Miller watches the sky from behind a blast wall and realizes something unsettling. The Allies are no longer reacting. They are operating. Orders from Berlin grow shorter. Less explanation. More urgency. Rail assets are to be preserved where feasible. Power restoration is now conditional. Fuel distribution is prioritized for combat units only. The implications are obvious. The repair network. Miller's world is no longer central to the war effort. It is auxiliary, temporary, expendable. On June 11th, Muller oversees the dismantling of usable equipment from a bombed switching station. Not to repair it, to strip it. Rails, transformers, cables, anything that can be moved is taken east, toward areas not yet under constant attack. The yard is left to rot. Men work silently, avoiding each other's eyes. This isn't rebuilding. It's salvage. A young electrician finally breaks the silence. Will they hit this place again? Muller answers without thinking. Yes. The electrician nods, strangely relieved. Certainty, even bad certainty, is easier than hope. The bombers return that night. And the next. And the next. Sometimes they hit fuel. Sometimes rail hubs. Sometimes nothing of obvious importance. That, Muller realizes, is the point. Uncertainty is now a weapon. If everything might be hit, everything must be defended. And nothing can be fully repaired. One afternoon, Muller studies aerial photographs taken by German reconnaissance. He expects to see chaos. Instead, he sees order. Bomb patterns are deliberate, repairs are noted, adjustments are visible between raids. The enemy is learning faster than they can respond. This isn't attrition anymore. It's feedback. A closed loop between destruction and adaptation, with Germany always a step behind. In late June, Muller visits a fuel depot that still functions. Barely. The tanks are camouflaged. The lines are buried. Everything screams temporary. An officer leans close and speaks softly. We're running on days now. Days. Not weeks. Not months. The word hangs in the air like a sentence. Muller leaves without replying. There is nothing left to calculate. That night, as bombers pass overhead once more, Muller doesn't take cover. He stands in the open, listening. The sound is different now. Not threatening. Assured. The sound of a system that no longer needs to prove itself. The Allies have air superiority. But more than that, they have temporal superiority. They decide when things break. They decide when or if. They are allowed to be fixed. The sky no longer asks permission. It simply arrives. Muller feels something settle inside him. Not despair. Acceptance. The war, as he has known it, is already over. The rest is delay. By July 1944, silence becomes suspicious. When a full day passes without bombers, Muller finds himself uneasy, waiting for the correction. Waiting for the overdue response from a system that never truly stops. Because when the bombers don't come, it usually means they're preparing. On July 20th, the day of the failed assassination attempt on Hitler, the Ruhr is oddly quiet. Rumors ripple through depots and repair yards faster than official notices ever could. Whispers of betrayal, of change, of possibility. Muller hears them all. He believes none of them. That night, the sky returns to its routine. engines, formations, bombs. History, it seems, will not pause for internal crises. The repair network is a shadow of itself now. Miller's teams no longer attempt full restoration. They patch only what must move immediately, a single line, a single transformer, a single convoy. Everything else is marked for later that never comes. Men are thinner, faces sharper, hands slower, mistakes more frequent. The bombers don't need to be precise anymore. Fatigue does the rest. One evening, Miller walks through a yard that once handled hundreds of trains a day. Now 3 tracks remain usable. A locomotive whistles a lonely sound and pulls away with half a load. It is the last train scheduled from this site. There will be no replacement. The yard will not be repaired again. Miller knows this because he has seen the new priority lists. Because he helped write them. By August, Allied ground forces are pushing east. The air war has done its work. Fuel shortages crippled German movements. Rail congestion turns retreats into chaos. Units that might have maneuvered are trapped by broken infrastructure. Miller watches troop trains back up for kilometers, waiting for clearance that never comes. The bottleneck isn't courage. It's logistics. The same machine that starved his repairs now strangles the army. Late one night, Miller climbs a small rise outside a shattered depot. Above him, bombers pass, fewer now, but still present. They don't need to come as often. The system they built has momentum. He realizes then what the engineers truly lost months ago. Not the rail yards. Not the power stations. But time. Once time belongs to the enemy, recovery becomes impossible. You can fight men. You can fight machines. But you cannot fight a calendar that no longer favors you. Miller opens his notebook one last time. The pages are filled with tallies, estimates, crossed-out plans. He closes it. There is nothing left to calculate. Below him, the ruins of the Ruhr lie quiet, not because they are healed, but because they are no longer worth hitting. The bombers move on. Their work is done. And in that stillness, Miller understands the final truth of the air war. Germany was not defeated by a single raid, or a single weapon, or even a single decision. It was defeated by a system that returned every night, learned every day, and never stopped being replaced. An industrial machine in the sky. And on the ground, engineers who finally realized, you cannot repair a war that has already been decided.